And we will hit 6.8, discussion of potential transient occupancy tax ordinance revision and voluntary collection agreements. And I'll turn this over to CAO Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Patrick Sullivan is here in the Zoom, and it's the last time I get to introduce Patrick to you in a board meeting, but he is here to present this request from the Tourism Improvement District that we look at possible changes to the TOT ordinance. Thank you, Patrick.
Good afternoon. Patrick Sullivan, County Tax Administrator. I want to provide some background again on just how we got to this point. Your board has previously supported efforts to identify unlicensed vacation rentals and bring them into compliance. For the past few years, the county's been using the host compliance software to try to identify those rentals. Once we've identified them, we've worked with the Treasury Tax Collector's Office to get them on the books and paying their taxes. What the Tourism Improvement District has brought up is they're hoping that we can explore some of the other options that are out there. There's two things they would like to accomplish. One is requiring that all vacation rentals display their license, and that would require a revision to one of our ordinances. We've seen that some counties and cities have done that through a zoning ordinance. Some have amended their TOT ordinance. But through those mechanisms, they've basically required that all businesses that are working as a vacation rental have to display that ID number. And what has come up through the TID is that would help level the playing field. Because right now, it's putting business owners in a difficult position that unlicensed properties are listing at a lower rate. The licensed properties are basically having to work the tax rate into their listed price. So properties that are licensed show up online like they're charging more than the unregistered properties. And this led to their second point, which was that they're hoping the county would be willing to consider voluntary collection agreements. This would change the dynamic of how we identify those unregistered properties. Right now, when a property operates without a license, first it's going to operate for some set period of time until that software picks it up. At that point, they would be reached out to, try to be brought into compliance, but often someone could be operating for a year or more before they're actually identified. So during that time, what we're hearing through the TID is that the businesses that are following the rules are essentially, they feel like they're being punished because they're having to pay that tax as they go, and these other operators are still undercutting them and sort of siphoning off their business. So the mechanism that's been suggested is a voluntary collection agreement. About half the counties in the state, or a little less than half, have done these. They're generally done with Airbnb and Vrbo, which are the larger companies involved in this. They make up the vast majority of the short-term rental market. If the county were to enter into one of these agreements, instead of using that software to identify the unregistered operators, the online platforms like Airbnb would actually collect the tax for the operator up front at the time of booking, and every quarter they would remit it to the county. So instead of the operators collecting that tax or paying it out of their revenues, it would be Airbnb or Vrbo that would pay it. This is the request through the TID. Unfortunately, Brian Fisher, the executive director for the TID, is not able to be here today. This item was originally scheduled for a previous board date, and when it was moved to today, he wasn't able to attend. But I think that's the gist of what they're hoping we can consider. There are certain things for your board to consider if we were to move forward with one of these voluntary collection agreements. One of the drawbacks that's been weighed in all the jurisdictions that look at them is you're often forced to give up some of your rights. There's certain concessions the counties have had to make, and the ability to audit and the identification of anonymous data, even delinquencies. A lot of times in these agreements, they're insisting that they will not collect back tax that's owed. The changed circumstance we have from several years ago in regards to that is we have identified a lot of the unregistered operations here. So hopefully there are not that many left, and those that are would not have been operating for would not have been operating for an extended period of time. So that would negate a lot of the drawbacks that we would face going forward with this now compared to where we would have been 3 or 4 years ago. But it is important for your board to be aware of that, and that is what has given many jurisdictions pause when they've thought about going forward. But that larger benefit from the agreements, I think for the jurisdictions that chose to proceed, is that it's a huge savings in staff time. And because you no longer, the number of investigations staff has to perform is very limited comparatively if you have these agreements in place. But I think the bigger piece is that the local lodging industry has really appreciated it and sort of clamored for it in these other jurisdictions because it leveled that playing field. In order to be on the platforms, they have to be identified as a licensed operator, and that Airbnb or Vrbo is paying the county the tax. So that sums up where we're at, and essentially what we're asking your board is to provide direction on how you want staff to proceed. We've had some initial meetings with the TID to better understand their position and what they're looking for, but we would need to do some further research, and then we'd have to explore how to go about revising an ordinance to get that requirement to be licensed on there and to display it in advertising. And we would need to work with county council for that. And the second part is for staff, whether you would want us to pursue these voluntary collection agreements and ultimately return to your board for further consideration. And I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Supervisor Pyska?
Yeah. So this has been a conversation in many TID meetings. I think Patrick's point about reducing the staff time is an important one because it's all going to be automated. And so I think that's going to be helpful on a lot of fronts. Patrick, how many hours do you think it's going to take to do this research and update the ordinance and get it back to us?
Oh, that's a tough question. Fortunately, it looks like because so many other jurisdictions have done them, especially since we first started looking into this, we have a lot more examples, and I think we could probably find some applicable ones in other counties. So I think that could trim a lot of time. I don't know. I've heard the process with Airbnb, and for instance, in Vrbo can be fairly long, and it's taken other counties several months to get through it because there's a lot of back and forth before it seems like a product is ready to be brought before the board. But I guess my hope, even compared to when we last talked in December or January, is with so many other jurisdictions doing them, it should be more streamlined. I would think maybe 20 to 30 hours total. Some of this would depend on county council's availability, though. Now that we better understand what the TID is looking for, when we first talked, the TID was looking for some broader changes to our ordinance, which would have been a lot more expansive. Now that we understand it's more limited in scope to just making it a requirement to display your license, I think that may narrow the work there, but I defer to Ms. Grant.
Ms. Grant?
Thank you. I don't foresee any real obstacles with the display of license issue. I think that can be done relatively readily. As far as the voluntary collection agreements, when the county is asked to give up certain authority, then that gives a little bit of pause. And I can tell you, I appreciate that other jurisdictions have done an ordinance or done something. I can also tell you that I can't go to court and say, well, Your Honor, Ventura County did it this way, and expect to get very far. So we'd have to look at that particular thing, the fashion of an ordinance, and the type of county that did the ordinance too, because obviously a charter county has much more authority to do things than a general law. But I don't think if it's in draft, it would take us probably over a couple of weeks. Sure, a couple of weeks to review it and put it together. But again, we'll have to check the law on it because it would be a disservice to you and to the county to just rely on someone else's rendition.
Yeah. And then if we were to go down this road and do this research and start preparing this, it would give us time to perform another audit and catch any new property owners who may have joined the platforms and are not participating. How long does that audit process take, Patrick?
So I was actually going to provide an update on that. Thank you, Supervisor Pyska. Our agreement with host compliance came up for renewal just a few months ago when this was initially scheduled. We've held on the renewal because we wanted your board's input on that. We wanted to know which direction we were going. Because if we are going down this path, we're not sure about staff capacity, that we actually have the real staff capacity to do a significant audit during this time. So I guess we'd have to make the decision of whether your board would want us to basically relicense that software, go through the audit process, which likely would delay moving on this. Because that audit process would probably take several months itself. And then we would probably have to go forward with this after that.
And how much is it to relicense the audit software, host compliance?
It depends on how many properties are there when they actually look at the contract. It was around $11,000. So it's not a great amount of money compared to other services. But what we just have to figure is whether our staff is going to be able to actually take advantage of it. And that was the concern, especially with Treasury Tax Collector. They've lost some additional staff, and we would need support in that office to go forward.
I think it would be important to do one last audit because we can't go after any back taxes if we were to make this revision to the ordinance. So I would feel comfortable doing that, but I don't know how all of you feel.
I guess my question would be, when was the last time that we did the audit?
2020, 2000.
So we've done a few rounds over the last, about 2.5 years. And I think we closed out everything that we were working on last summer. So there could be operations that have been up for a year or I guess potentially more. That there's also the issue of people take listings on and off. And there's efforts made to evade this software. People have a better understanding of how it works. So I don't know that there's any way we'll really know if we got everyone, but certainly every time we do one of these sweeps, we're going to pick up more of the unregistered operations.
And we have a lot of new vacation rentals since in the last year and last 2 years. So I'm just wondering how many new operators we have. I know when we look at the financials, there's some holes around the county where we know that there are operators, but we're not showing any income from those areas.
So that software can help identify some of those. It is time consuming because especially as people change their listings, sometimes what appears to be an unregistered operation, we do actually have on the books, but the name has changed. So without essentially going through that audit process, I don't know that we could effectively answer what's out there right now. It would take some work to get those numbers.
Okay.
Supervisor Spatier?
I think that I agree with Supervisor Pyska about the importance of staff time being spent on this. If we can automate something, I think that is a really good way to go, especially this is not a one-time, this is a very annual rinse, repeat, recycle type of thing, or quarterly, but yes, we repeat it very often, so let's make it as simple as possible. I have a couple questions. One is I'd be very interested if we give direction to yes, let's go ahead and do a revision so that we can make those things possible. I'm very interested in knowing what is our Airbnb look like in comparison to the last 2 or 3 years. I think that's an important number to look at as we're dealing with housing crisis here in Lake County. How many houses are being shut down and only used as Airbnb versus not? And it's not to say that we would go in any specific direction, but just to at least have a level of understanding of what are our houses being used for, because our housing stock is not growing at a rapid pace. I think that the audit is an important part that I think that we should probably take a look at that before engaging in a change that doesn't allow us to do the back taxes. But then again, my last question is, what teeth do we have for those that aren't following the rules? Like in my mind, this conversation very much parallels the conversation of illegal grows and legal grows. We want people to follow the rules, and if you're not following the rules, we need to build teeth into whatever our ordinance is. What happens to those that we find that are not paying TOT? Are there any penalties? What is the incentive to actually do the right thing?
So your board did pass that resolution previously when we began this process of identifying the unregistered operators. And that was if an unlicensed operator cooperated with the county and either paid off their back tax that was owed or entered into a payment plan and remained in compliance with it, those penalties could be waived. So normally there's late penalties involved with this. If it was a first-time operator, they have the opportunity to not incur those penalties. The treasurer tax collector, or I believe it may have actually been the county administrative officer, has the authority to waive them based off the board's resolution. So if people cooperate and come forward on their own or respond if they are identified, there is an opportunity to save in those costs. So there is an incentive for people to cooperate.
But that incentive is only if you get caught.
Well, yes, to a certain extent, although if you brought yourself in and identified it, you would also be allowed to get those penalties waived. Your board didn't have a sunset on that provision, I believe, so it still stands as of now.
Appreciate the answer.
All right, any other comments from the board? Supervisor Simon.
I appreciate the conversation. Obviously, a couple years back when we decided to really go into this, I did know that there were a lot of folks out there that wanted to do the right thing. So I know they did come forward. I don't know about other districts if you're contacted by folks that, hey, I want to do the right thing here. I want to, move in that direction. I think what's being requested, I'm okay with moving forward with changing the ordinance and looking into the VCA, the voluntary collection agreement moving forward, because it's only going to grow. I know we have a housing crisis here, but every year, as you said, it's growing. Airbnb is the largest hotel in the world, and it's just going to continue growing, especially now with construction costs. Why build a 30-unit, hotel when you can go out and buy, 30 homes, and it'd be a lot cheaper to do it that way because it's already done. So the transition's happening. It's being forced in the economy at this point, and I think anything we continue establishing to help our folks that are already in the program and picking up the TOT is real important. So I'm in favor of moving forward with this, coming back to make these two changes that were requested. I did have one question, Patrick. You're always pretty quick on the numbers. Since we implemented and really started to audit the program and bring people in compliance, do you have numbers of any of the positive changes that we've made just in the last 2.5 years or 3 years?
Yeah, we definitely have had some spikes in transient occupancy tax. It's a little complicated because of the pandemic to know exactly what the impact was. But since we implemented the host compliance software, our TOT has gone up. I can give you just the examples that in 2019, our receipts were 659,000 approximately. Following year, 635. Last year, 869,000. In years prior, in 2018 and 2017, it was about 400 to 425,000. So we've had some major gains in terms of getting people registered, but not all of that is just due to registration. But certainly, since we implemented this program, we've had major gains.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'll open it up to the public for any comments. Do you see anybody on Zoom? Not seeing anybody on Zoom, I'll bring you back to the board.
This direction?
I think so.
Can I ask for clarification as well from your board? Because the direction discussed here was whether to explore the ordinance revisions and the voluntary collection agreements, which it sounds like your board does wish to do. But also if we're going to do the sort of a final audit run and try to identify as many of these as we can, we would need to bring the host compliance agreement back to your board to do that. And I guess I just appreciate direction on whether you want to work on these in tandem on parallel tracks, or whether you want us to start with host compliance and then, when that audit's done, initiate these other changes.
I think parallel would be most efficient.
Ms. Grant?
The only thing I would say is your board can give some direction for staff to proceed and bring you back something about the audit for action, but the audit's not on the agenda today.
Okay. Thank you for that.
And for me, I'm in favor of moving forward what was proposed today, the ordinance change, the VC. I won't talk about the ordinance, but that's what I'm willing to move forward.
I'm in favor of that.
All right, so it looks like you have the direction, right? And there's.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, very much.